Hi everyone, and welcome to the argument or logic and argumentation basics. What you are going to need while you watch this video is the half sheet quiz worksheet that I gave you. Remember, you do have to watch this video by a certain time, and then I'll collect the worksheet on the date that I announced in class. Please make sure that you have that worksheet done and ready and that you've answered all the questions on Edpuzzle and completely watched this video. In class, I'm going to be focusing on the Toulmin model and logical fallacies, while at home you're going to get these mini basics where we don't have to have the lecture in class. So we're going to go all the way back to Aristotle. And to do this, I mean we're going way back in time, 384 BC to 322 BC. Now what Aristotle had hoped was that mankind would embrace logic. He recognized that those other components, pathos and ethos, they are very, very important, and they're incredibly effective, sometimes more so than logic. But if you're going to be dealing with politics or any major concept, he always believed that it should be dealt with logic rather than letting our heart guide our whim. Now, his philosophies have had a long-lasting developmental impact on all Western philosophical theories. In some small way, it may not be a resounding tidal wave, but there are pieces of Aristotelian logic scattered throughout a lot of the philosophy that you learn here and then as you go forward. So the science of logic, everything here is that it's not a perfect science, rather it's very conflicting. I understand that, but here what we look at is an Aristotelian system where everything is analytical. Whatever evidence you are presenting, it should have led you to a logical understanding. There has to be some rational way to look at everything. Now, what this is designed to make you understand is that what I'm teaching you right now, what we're working on in class, it's not rocket science. So as you can see, science is not, or logic is not a science. It's not. It's just literally saying 2 plus 2 does equal 4. My evidence is based on this mathematical unit and this mathematical unit. Just keep this in mind as you move forward. Now, the Aristotelian syllogism. This is when we have 2 premises and a conclusion. It's incredibly axiomatic. It's incredibly easy to spot. And so you, in math, might have known this as a transitive property, depending on your math class. What you'll see is A, every Greek is a person. My next statement is letter B, every person is mortal, and C, my conclusion, it stands that every Greek would be mortal. What you'll note is that A equals B, B equals C, C equals A. And so when you go through this whole system, you should note that what I'm taking as my major premise is that every Greek is a person. My next set of grounds is that every person is mortal. Well, if every person is Greek and every mortal is a person, and a person is mortal, therefore it stands that a Greek would have to be mortal. You have to piece things together, and sometimes that takes a little bit of time, a little preemptive thinking, but in the long run, it is the most logical system. Everything has to equate to the same sort of rational understanding. So with an argument, it's important that you have to, the skill that you will be assessed, rather, is that you identify, you construct, and you evaluate arguments. This is not when you sit and you bicker and you fight and we nitpick. Everything that we've looked at in this class has proven that everything comes from language. And so what we'll do now in this semester is we're going to focus on what the conclusion is and how you got to that conclusion, what grounds got you there. Now, when we move into the Toulmin model in class, this will start to make much more sense, but you can understand how whatever evidence you've had or whatever understandings you've gotten from the text, the reason you came to that conclusion had to be from a logical jump. What logical jump was it? Now, to give an argument means that you yourself will provide me a set of premises for reasons for accepting whatever conclusion you present. So all essence, when you are giving an argument, it's not to attack or to criticize. That's when you are literally just kind of bullying someone. Rather, arguments are going to be used to understand different viewpoints. You don't have to agree with someone. I'm not saying that you have to adopt any viewpoint, but you have to listen and understand why that person came to that conclusion. That's where everything is going to be a little different from maybe 3-4 honors. Now, the downfall is dogmatic people. What we'll see, and you'll see this more in class, dogmatic people tend to make assertions without having any sort of reason. Usually it's when something struck an emotional chord, and so they become very defensive and they feel like they've been criticized, and so instead of approaching the topic with logic and understanding, they tend to become a little bit more effective. They fail to actually provide an argument with a premise and a conclusion, or sometimes they're so caught up in defending their own beliefs that they end up putting logical fallacies into play. So you'll spot fallacies happening more towards content rather than form. This again will make more sense once I put logical fallacies. There's a lot of components to this method of writing. So for you to become a critical thinker and for you to be successful this semester, you need to develop the habit of giving good arguments to support your claims. What that means is, provide me a thesis, whatever your thesis, whatever point it is you want to make, and then you are going to provide the evidence that led you to that understanding. Giving a good argument is one of the most important ways that you convince other people to that certain claim should be accepted. If you want me to listen to you on the day of your disputation, you need to be an expert. For you to be an expert, you need to have facts. You need to understand the information. So really understand that this is all about the text. This is about how you got to an understanding based not on any circumstantial evidence that you have been given as a child, in your upraising, in your culture, or your background. This is saying what information led you there. And you become a definitive individual and make your own stance, because there is no right or wrong here. It's just a matter of how you got to that point. So we're going to look at a few examples. The first one, you're going to see if you want to find a good job, you should be hardworking. You do want to find a good job, so you should be hardworking. What you're going to see is I want to break this down. And so the first two sentences here would be my premise. If you want to find a good job, you should be hardworking. You do want to find a good job. Therefore, it stands that you should be hardworking. So you can see that the first sentence and the second sentence worked as setting up what my conclusion is. Based on you wanting a good job, you are hardworking. That's how it all came together. My last sentence is the most basic conclusion. So to give this argument is to offer the premises as reasons for accepting the conclusion. I have to read my first two sentences, and then when I read my third sentence, I go, okay, that's what you want me to understand. I'm hardworking. I do want a good job. I am probably a little bit of both of those, okay? But it's all based on the premises that were presented. Now, arguments in real life, it's not as easy as it sounds, because what will happen is you will be listening and it's not written in front of you, but you have to look for the premise and a conclusion. And the best way to do this is to look for those premise or conclusion indicators, similar to ways that you indicate that you're moving from one paragraph to another. So on this slide, I'm not going to read it to you, but you'll see that several of these phrases are premise indicators. All of these have something in common in the sense that it's presenting some form of information. Now, I would suggest that you watch the context, though. If I write the phrase, I have been here since noon, it's very different in terms of the meaning, whereas if I were to say X is an even number since X is divisible by 4. One of these presents just kind of a chronological information, whereas the other is actually presenting a premise that will lead you to a conclusion. Now this next slide walks you through conclusion indicators. And here again, you'll see that they all share something in common. The most basic piece, they all walk you to the end of a point. It's the in conclusion, sort of cliched ending. Now, there are 3 arguments presented up on this screen. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read them to you. I want you to pause. I want you to think about what's wrong with it, and I will show you why these are really, really horrible arguments. Let's start with the first one. When people sweat a lot, they tend to drink more water. So the question, of course, is what's wrong with this? Well, it's a single statement for starters, and in that single statement, it doesn't have enough to really make an argument. And so you'll see when people sweat a lot, they tend to drink more water. Yes, but what got you there? And so that if that was something you wrote in an essay, that's the comment you would see from me is what, how, why, trying to understand your train of thinking. The second example is one of my favorite ones. Once upon a time, there was a prince and a princess. They lived happily together, and one day they decided to have a baby. But the baby grew up to be a nasty and cruel person, and they regret it very much. So why is this not an argument? Aside from the fact that it is a horrible fairy tale, this actually is just a chronological description of events that happened to a very horrible prince and princess, at least assuming, of course, that they're horrible, because how can you produce a horrible child without being horrible yourself? But it's just a story. It has no conclusion, which means that there's no premise that has been explored. And the final example, can you come to the meeting tomorrow? This has no premise. This has no conclusion. This is a question that does not contain an argument. So keep in mind, as you're walking through here, not everything is an argument, but sometimes when you're writing it, you think it is an argument, but you need to make sure that a premise has been established somewhere within that essay. You're not writing major, minor, conclusion in that order exactly. You still have to write with your own fluidity, your own style, but I should be able to see how you came to those answers. Now, the syllogism is the old Fluffy is a mammal argument, and when we talked a little bit about this last semester, I was stared at with blank eyes. So the example in italics up on your screen, all cats are mammals, Fluffy is a cat, therefore Fluffy is a mammal. So when we walk through this, you're going to see that all cats are mammals. This is a general statement. All cats are mammals. Now, I'm not dealing with truth or false. I'm just dealing with what I'm saying. All cats are mammals. That is as generalized as I can get. Now I'm going to specify. Fluffy is a cat. This is my minor premise. This is as specific as I can get. Therefore, based on my major and my minor premise, my general and my specific statement, it stands that Fluffy is a mammal. Now, if you look at this next slide, it'll actually walk you through the definitions. A major premise is a general statement. A minor premise is a specific statement, and your conclusion is based on the 2 premises. So if all cats are mammals, that again is my major premise right up here, major. When I say that Fluffy is a cat, that's when I move into my minor. I specifically identify something. And then based on what I have, I took my 2 premises and I drew a statement that Fluffy has to be a mammal. Because if a mammal is a cat and Fluffy is a cat, it stands to reason that Fluffy has to be a mammal. A equals B, B equals C, C equals A. It has to all come together. Now, the helpful tip when it comes to analysis and evaluation, try to label things. Sometimes you also may want to rewrite the actual syllogism. So if we go back to the good job example, my major premise is if you want to find a good job, you should be hardworking. That's a generalized statement. But when I talk about you wanting to find a good job, that's you. I'm specifying you. Therefore, my conclusion is you should be hardworking because you want a good job. That's the logical inference. Now, the format. In the next slide, you'll see that there is a shift in major, minor, conclusion. And so I rewrite what it looks like. The statement, go ahead and read it. We should not inflict unnecessary pain on cows and pigs. After all, we should not inflict unnecessary pain on any animal with consciousness, and cows and pigs are animals with consciousness. Well, if I break this down, I have to understand what the major premise is. Well, the major premise is a generalized statement. So we should not inflict unnecessary pain on any animal with a consciousness. That's all animals. That's as general as I get. Cows and pigs are animals with consciousness. So my last little clause here is the minor premise because I specify specific animals. Therefore, my conclusion, we should not inflict unnecessary pain on cows and pigs. Based on the information that I presented in my conclusion, which was first, I then followed up with my premises. That's totally fine, but it still has to equate in one way or another. C equals A. C can still come first, but I have to find the evidence that how you got there. Now, the next example. If this liquid is acidic, the litmus paper would have turned red, but it hasn't, so the liquid is not acidic. Now, if you look through this, there is a conclusion, but it is not outright stated, so sometimes you have to rewrite it. So if I were to look for a generalized statement, the major premise would be if the liquid is acidic, the litmus paper would have turned red. So this very first one. My minor premise is right here, but it hasn't. So I would rewrite it as saying the litmus paper has not turned red, and so here is my conclusion, the liquid is not acidic. So I think earlier I may have said the conclusion wasn't stated. It's the minor premise that wasn't stated. Any way you look at this, they don't have to be outright explicitly stated, but you should be able to infer. But it hasn't is a little vague, but it does still give you the understanding of what has happened with the litmus paper. Now, other things to consider in presenting an argument with syllogistic format, the premise and conclusion have to be identified. They should be something that you pick up on really clearly. And this is just a piece of suggestions for you to go forward. When we rewrite some of the sentences, or when you're reading any passage, any prompt, sometimes the best thing to do is to rewrite it, either as a summary or write out the major minor conclusion. This might allow you a chance to be more effective with the presentation. And then finally, other facts to consider. You'll also see, and I've already mentioned this, but the conclusion doesn't always have to come at the end of a passage. So the example, how can you believe that corruption is acceptable? It is neither fair nor legal. What happened here is that they posed it with a rhetorical question, which you would never do because rhetorical questions are weak in writing, but you understand what the premise and the conclusion is. Corruption is neither fair nor legal, and it's very, even though it's not written out with the 3-sentence format, you should still very easily understand. Now, like I said, when you guys come to class, we are going to spend time talking about the Toulmin model, and then we'll also be talking about logical fallacies, and all of these pieces will slowly start to come together. It does take time. This is a very difficult task because you have to question everything, but at the same time of questioning everything, you also need to make sure that what you are focusing on is something that you can, in fact, prove. The grounds have to be there. So this information that I've given you links to the synthesis and the argumentation, both question 1 and question 3. Keep that somewhere rooted in the back of your mind. We're coming into the last 2 models of writing. They're very similar in terms of how you approach things, how you think it all through. One will provide you evidence, one will ask that you create the evidence. So as we move forward, if you need help, please do not hesitate to ask me for that help. Let me help make this more effective and more easy than anything else that you have done. Having said that, make sure you finish that video. If you need to go back and rewatch any part of this, please do. If not, I will see you guys tomorrow in class, and have a wonderful evening.